Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a brick material in Substance Designer. Now we've done a brick material before, but that was a more simple brick material. It was more for beginners. Today we're going to do one that's going to work great for like more outdoor environments, any kind of application of a big maybe industrial building, a more fancy bricks this time. I would call this a more advanced tutorial. But I did want to have one that was a bit higher quality than the last one so that we could then go into modeling and do some walls and make some cracks and show how to trim it and different techniques of using like materials and models and blending them together to make different effects. So right now on the screen you can see the result. This is running in Unreal, and I'm going to take you from the start in Substance Designer all the way to the end in Unreal. This one's going to be a little bit of a longer one probably. We'll see if we can kick through it. It is a more advanced tutorial, so I will be kind of moving relatively quickly. Also, I am a really small channel, so if I could get a like or subscribe or any kind of interaction, if you guys find this stuff useful, that'd be great. I am trying to get a little bit bigger and give me the motivation to kind of keep doing this sort of thing. Okay, so let's just get started. So here I am in Substance Designer, and I'm going to zoom out quick and show you the graph. So now you can see that this one's a little bit more complicated. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start from the beginning. We're going to go node by node, and we're going to work our way through. And I'll have timestamps in the video in case you want to pause and come back or whatever. So to get to this point, you go to File, New, Substance Graph, like that. Choose metallic roughness, name it whatever you want. I named mine T brick wall B because we already have a brick wall that we made, so this is just another variation. And you can name yours whatever you want. And when you hit OK, it'll give you your outputs. Now we're not going to be using the metal output, so you can go ahead and delete that. And we're also not going to be using the ambient occlusion output, so you can go ahead and delete that. Okay, so let's just get started. So to put your nodes in, you just hit the spacebar and then you can search them out. This is a tile sampler grayscale, so I'll show you hitting the spacebar and it opens up, and just search out for what I'm doing. I am going to go through every setting in every node that I do so that you can copy those down exactly. I do encourage experimentation. When you get to the end of this material, this one is advanced enough that you should be able to make just about anything. Bricks are one of the most complicated materials to make, and we're going to make a really nice convincing one today. So I'm going to try to go over all of the settings, and you can see here on the right, here's all of our settings. And I'm going to try to be as thorough as possible and tell you everything I changed in every one of the nodes. Now there's a possibility that that'll miss something, but I will have this open over here so that you can, if something doesn't look quite right, you can see what I had changed over on the right hand side. I will make every effort to not make any mistakes, and I will recheck the video to hopefully find any mistakes that I make, but there's always a possibility with materials this complicated that there will be some. So we just need to kick right along so that we can keep this video moving. So in our tile sampler grayscale, you have X amount 14, Y amount 36, and then we can kind of scroll down and see as the pattern is square. I believe that's just the default. Come down here to size, 0.99, and you can see what it's doing over here in your 2D view. The Y, we want to go 0.92, and we want to adjust the scale to 0.995, scale random 0.07, and then you can come down a little further, do offset 0.475. Now you can do 0.5, but I like to have it a little bit uncentered, I suppose, to add a little bit of variation. Kind of see what we're getting down here. The rest of this looks the same. We're going to keep going down. This rotation random will rotate them a little bit, and that's why you have these. They look like they're rotating here. And that's 0.0085 for rotation random. Can't go too crazy on that because then it will rotate and you'll lose the nice grout areas here that we're going to use for grout later. The rest, I believe, is normal. I think these are all the regular settings. So that would be our tile sampler grayscale. And I'm just going to kind of scroll through again just in case. And everything looks like we went through all of the settings. Okay? So now we'll run that tile sampler grayscale into a flood fill node. Now what the flood fill node does is it allows you to use a flood fill, which also allows you to use a lot of other nodes that work directly off the flood fill. So we'll run that into a flood fill. We'll do a flood fill gradient. So the flood fill doesn't have any settings. We'll go to flood fill gradient, and you'll see that I changed the angle variation here. And what that'll do is it'll put different gradients in the flood fill. Now we're going to levels that out so that I can take the light parts of that. And here are my level settings. You can see I move the handles here. And here are the numbers if you want to put in the numbers. Now keep in mind we're going to have to kick through this pretty fast. So this is a more advanced tutorial. So this is going to chip away the sides of our bricks. So now we'll do another flood fill right here. And what that does, it allows us to do another flood fill gradient, which then puts gradients in all of these little corner guys, which allows us to go to our histogram select here. And you can see down here the position is 1, range 0.75, contrast is 1. And what that allows us to do is mask off some of these corners that we're cutting out, because we don't want it to cut out like all these crazy corners from every brick. So we're going to mask that out using this histogram here. So we're going to run that flood fill random gradient here into a levels, and we'll level it out so that it's all bright white. Okay, so that means pulling these handles all to the left. And you can see that here on the right here. And if I open up this, you can see all the settings for the levels. Okay? So now we run that levels and our histogram into our blend mode. And our blend is set to subtract because we're subtracting those other ones out. And what that leaves us with, we run our tile sampler here, the output of that into the background of the blend, and the output of the levels into the foreground, and the histogram into the opacity. And what that does is it cuts out these corners of our bricks. See these black cutouts here in our mask? And you can play around with all of this stuff to get more cutouts, less cutouts. Just start messing with all of the different stuff here if you'd like. But if you want to follow me exactly, then these are the settings I used for the histogram down here. And you can also see the random seed here. I'm not sure how much the random seed matters there, but I did change it. So we'll run this blend into a flood fill, and this is like a major node that we're going to use. So this is our major mask here, and we finished up our brick shape, and we're going to run that into this flood fill here. And we're going to do a lot of different things off of this flood fill. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to run the flood fill into one of these little node things. You can get it from right here and pop it in. I'll show you. It pops right in, but I don't want to do that, so we'll just undo that. But you can just pop it straight in and then connect this into there so it's not so messy, so you don't have all sorts of crazy stuff going on. So now we're going to we have the mask for the bricks. Now we're going to do the bevel. Just a basic big bevel for the bricks. So we run the flood fill into this node, and that first we go from the flood fill into flood fill to grayscale, and that just makes the mask back again, and you can see it here. And we run that into a bevel, and what that does is it'll just bevel the stones ever so slightly. Here are the settings for the bevel: negative 0.003, and I'm not sure, I don't believe I changed anything else. I think that's all that was on the bevel there. So then we go to this flood fill to grayscale. We take our flood fill and do it to flood fill to grayscale. And then For this, you can copy my random seeds for stuff or just kind of go with whatever you've got because it's going to still give you a good result. We're not relying on any of our random seeds to do anything very specific. So down here in the flood fill to grayscale, 0.44 for luminance adjustment, and then we got 0.4 for luminance random. We run that in to a blend with our bevel here, and that's at opacity 0.55, and we multiplied those two together. We multiplied the bevel over the flood fill grayscale. And what that does is it gives us bumps out of our bricks. So having them either more or less white will bump them in, or it'll determine how much the brick bumps out. So now we're going to run our flood fill here into a flood fill gradient again. We've done that before, and that gives us our gradients. And down here again, we pump the angle variation up so it does a different gradient for each brick. And then we blend that with our blend from this one, and we blend it very lightly, min darken 0.1. And what that does is it'll make the bricks ever so slightly have different angles based on like the out direction, like the normal. So we'll do that one more time. We'll blend that at min 0.1, and we'll do another flood fill gradient, only we'll randomize the seed again. I don't know if I showed I probably randomized this one as well. Yep, here's the numbers. If you want to copy exactly, absolutely don't have to. Go to flood fill gradient here. That's the random seed for that. Here's the angle variation again, all the way up. And then we'll blend that to the last blend. We'll do min darken 0.1 again. And that is our brick bevel. Okay? So we're going to run our brick bevel into an FXAA grayscale. I like to use that just to get rid of some of the aliasing that's in the bevels. And I kind of did this bevel part based on the fact that I was gonna FXAA grayscale. Okay? So now that we're done with the bevel, let's go into brick details. Okay? So this is our height map so far. It's very clean, and we need to kind of crunchy that up so it looks like the edges of bricks. So we run that FX into a slope blur grayscale. Okay. With the samples 32, intensity 0.075. We do a black and white spots down here. Black and white spots 1. Let's kind of get a better view. There we go. Black and white spots 1. Scale 2. Disorder 0.58. Roughness 0.32. And we run that into the slope of the slope blur grayscale. And we do that at that intensity I mentioned earlier. And if you kind of zoom in, you can see it starts to crunchy up the sides of our bricks. Run that into another slope blur grayscale. This time we'll do the intensity at 0.05. Black and white spots will run into that again with settings of 2, 0.58, 0.29, and we'll run that in. And it just adds more crunchiness to the sides of our bricks. Now we'll do even another one. Another slope blur grayscale. I think I said the settings for this one, but we'll still go over them again. That one's 32 and 0.05. This slope blur grayscale is 32 and 0.1, so a little bit stronger. But these black and white spots are more pushed together. The scale is 4. Disorder 0.25. Roughness 0.18. And then it just keeps on adding more crunchiness in. You can see these ones are kind of pushing in even crazier, like here and there and there. You're getting a lot of pushes in now. So one more slope blur grayscale after this, and this one is 32 samples and intensity 0.49. And we'll do another, and this time we'll do a purlin. And the purlin will be at 3, disorder 0, and throw that into the slope here. And that just does kind of a more of an overall warp of everything, just to kind of give it that variation that we kind of want to make things look more natural. All right, so now we'll run this slope blur grayscale into a non-uniform directional warp. And here are the angles. The degrees 31.97. You could probably just put in like 32 or something. Warp angle multiplier 0.26. All these other settings, I don't know if I change them, but there are tail length, trail fade, and trail curve all the way up. And you take the out, and then you take this crystal here, crystal 1, at a scale of 18 disorder 0, and run that into the intensity map of this non-uniform directional warp. That just warps things around a little bit based on a crystal. Crystals are good for more crunchy, rocky types of surfaces to warp things. So here's our height map right now. We can kind of look at it. This is what we've got so far for the shape of our brick. So now we've taken it from a pretty simple bevel to a more complicated bevel that looks more natural. So now we're going to run this non-uniform directional warp into a histogram select, and this is basically just masking it. Again, it's a way to mask it. So you have position 0.95 contrast 0 for that, and run that into the opacity of the next blend, because we're gonna blend a little bit more together. So up here, we're gonna start a new thing. We'll do grunge galvanic large, and I didn't randomize that, it looks like. And so the warp intensity, I think all of this is standard, but you can check it out. I run that into an invert grayscale because I, for some reason, wanted it to be inverted. I guess I like that better. And then we're going to vector warp grayscale. And what that does is it's going to mix it up based on, if you go all the way back here, we have a flood fill random color. So we have to go all the way back to our original flood fill, run our flood fill into a flood fill random color, which will add all these random colors into each of our bricks. Now we take that flood fill random color and run that into the vector map of the vector warp grayscale. And what that does is it takes this and it mixes all of these up so they're all in different positions. It kind of like puzzles it apart and puts a different thing in each brick. Okay? So that's really nice. So you don't have this continuous pattern that goes all over your bricks. So we'll take that vector warp grayscale, and I think the settings are all normal on that. It looks like it. And we bring that down, the vector warp grayscale, we bring down into the slope blur grayscale, because we're going to kind of do another slope blur on it, and we'll do a moisture noise, and I'll show you here. The moisture noise, I'm going to pull this a little closer. So the moisture noise, let's see, pattern size 0.16. Here's the scale in disorder, y is 1. You can see that the angle is 0, so it kind of pulls it apart that way. We do a slope blur grayscale. What that'll do is it kind of makes it all crunchy. You can see how it kind of like just pushes everything in that direction. Now we only want that to be on the bricks and not the mortar, so we're going to take that down into a blend. Okay, the blend is going to be overlay 0.59. We take our non-uniform directional warp that we did earlier, plug that into the background of the blend, and then we plug the histogram, because that masks it out, into the opacity. And then here's what we get for our height map. Now you can see we're getting some cracky details in, all sorts of different kind of neat height mappy details. And that finishes off our brick details 1. So let's run that down, okay, into this blend here. So we're going to have to start a new chain down here. So we're going to start cracks. Now I'm going to go through cracks pretty quick because I have another cracks video. And this is essentially the same way that I've done it, but I'm still going to go through all the settings. Here's a cells 4. At scale 6, and then of course I randomized it a few times. I run that cells 4 into an edge detect. The edge detect width is 1, edge roundness 0. We run that into a blend where we go min, darken, and 1, and we blend a crystal over the top of it. And the crystal, it's a crystal 1, and the crystal scale is 6 and 0.6, and we run that into the top of the blend. We blend those two together. You can see the result here in the 2D view. We run that into another edge detect, and you see what that does is it gives us this great spider webby type of effect. And that'll be what we use for our cracks. And with that, we do edge width 1, and I do a little bit of roundness, 0.1. It kind of adds, let's see if I can show you. It rounds these off a little bit, which I think is more natural looking. So we go to invert grayscale. Biggest reason I do that is I just like to, I can see the cracks better that way. We're going to make another crystal here. Scale 13, disorder 0.72. Run that into the intensity of a directional warp. We'll warp those cracks a little bit. Intensity 7.2. Warp angle I just have going horizontal. If you look at what that does is it's kind of warping things a little bit so the cracks aren't quite as straight. You can kind of play with all these settings depending on how you like your cracks to look. We're going to use that same crystal we made here and the directional warp, and we're going to run them into a slope blur grayscale. Directional warp goes in the top node. Crystal goes into the bottom plugin, and you can just go here. This one samples 32, and the intensity is very light at 0.055, and it just adds another little bit to each of these. You can see kind of like now we're getting this weird additional detail in our bevel for the cracks. We run that into a vector warp grayscale. And if you remember before, that's what we used to mix up the pattern up here. We're going to use the same one, which was over here, this flood filled a random color, run that down into the vector map of our vector warp grayscale. And what that does is it mixes up the cracks so it would mix them up for each brick so that none of the cracks are flowing from brick to brick. Okay? Now we're going to take that and then we're going to run that into a slope blur grayscale just to add some more to it. Do another black and white spots here. I'll show you the settings for the black and white spots. Settings, scale 4, disorder is 0.87, roughness 0.43. Run this into the slope of the slope blur grayscale. Slope blur grayscale in samples 32, intensity 0.1. And then you'll get this result here. And then we'll run that into a levels just to darken it a little bit. I pulled the white handle down on the bottom, it looks like. And if you open up the settings, here's the numbers if you want to add the exact numbers in. Okay. So that's that. And it looks like I added a little bit more to it because I didn't like cracks everywhere. So what I wanted to do is mask that out. So we run our original flood fill way up here, all the way down. I made a pin down here just to keep things organized. I ran that into flood fill to grayscale. And the settings for that are 0.37 and luminance 1. All right, so I run that flood fill to grayscale into a levels so that I can just make it black and white. So either the brick is black or the brick is white. And so I pulled these top level handles really hard together. You can see here, here's levels low, here's all the settings for that. If you want to get it like exactly like I have it here. Otherwise, you pull all the handles kind of close together, and what your goal is to make black and white. Some of the bricks are black, some of them are white. And the white ones, well, it looks like in this case, the black ones are going to mask out some of these cracks. So I run that into the blend up here. And I do a multiply, so it makes black. The black from this multiplies over this and covers it up. So now we only have these cracks instead of this many. So you see this many, and now quite a few less. Right? Now that we have our cracks done and our brick details 1 done, then we're going to run the brick details 1 into bottom of a blend, into the second insert of a blend. And we'll run this blend over the top of it into the input. And we'll do a subtract with opacity 0.2. And that'll subtract that out. And you can see these cracks in here now. You can see how it added chips and cracks here in some of our bricks. All right. Now we're doing brick details 2. Let's just add some more details to each of the bricks. All of this stuff is pretty subtle in the end, But the more and more you add, it gives your bricks like distinction and it makes it look more natural. As I said before, bricks are one of the more difficult materials to create. So okay, so now we have our blend. And let's start a little chain up here. So let's make a crystal. And the crystal scale is 32. And we run the crystal scale into a slope blur grayscale, and with that we're going to control with black and white spots that we're going to use for some other stuff too. The black and white spots are 2, scale, disorder 0.24, and roughness 0.48. We'll run that into the slope of the slope blur grayscale. This one will do samples 32, intensity 0.07, and you'll see what that does. Goes from clean to crunchy, right? We'll do the same thing with that black and white spots, but we'll run that into the intensity and warp angle of a non-uniform directional warp, and that'll kind of spin things around and make things even kind of crazier. You can see how we go from this to this by running that same black and white spots. Now we take the result of this non-uniform directional warp and we blend that down here. We take our original blend here, run it into a histogram, so we can decide how much of this is going to affect our map. In the histogram, our position is 1 and 0.35, and we're just making a mask basically, and it's in the lighter parts that we're going to have this new detail added. So we'll run that into the mask of this blend here, run our original blend into the background, and then run the result of those crystals into the foreground and do overlay 0.08. And that just adds more detail popping out here and there. Okay, now we'll run this blend into a slope blur grayscale here. Let me see if overlay 0.08. We'll run this blend into the top of the slope blur grayscale input, and then for the slope we'll just use that black and white spots again, and we'll just pull that over into here. This one samples 32, 0.02, and again this is just adding more and more and more detail and crunchiness and cracks in our bricks. We're going to run this slope blur grayscale into this blend here. This will be copy 0.2, and what we're going to do is we're going to overlay this grunge concrete. So the grunge concrete, I don't believe that's just, you just look that guy up. I don't believe I changed any settings for that. Plug that over the other slope blur grayscale, and then we want to mask that out a little bit. So we're going to make a mask to blend those two things together. Let's start with grunge rough dirty. I'm going to transform that, and we're going to rotate that 90 degrees. So I put the transform in, you just put 90 here for the angle and it'll flip it 90 degrees. Run that into the background of a blend, and in the foreground we'll put a black and white spots. That might be the original settings. 1, 0, 1, 1 scale, disorder 0, roughness 1, black and white spots 1 into the top, and then there, and blend those together. And of course, I do encourage you to play it. You can, any of this stuff you can play with, any of it you can do random seeds, and you'll get different results. Some things will change things more than others, but I do encourage you to like save, go back, play with stuff. By the end of this one, you're going to be able to make just about anything. So this blend is subtract and opacity 1, subtracting that one from this one, and then we'll level that out just a tiny bit to get it a little bit kind of darker, I guess, and more compact. And here's the settings for that if you want to put in the numbers. Otherwise it looks like I just pulled the white handle down basically there. Now we'll run this levels into the mask of this blend and blend this grunge concrete over the top. And what this does is it gives kind of like micro details in there, really small, really nice concrete details that are really not even that noticeable unless you really zoom in, but you can see them in here if you really get in deep. So here's our height map so far. I'm just going to save, and we're going to take that and we're going to plug that into this height blend here. And this is basically almost done with our height map. But right now we need to make some grout for it. So we'll plug this blend into this height blend. And we'll probably go over the settings again for this too, but it's 0.7 and 1, and we're going to blend two height maps together. We're going to make a grout height map right now. Very simple grout. So this is grout. Go in moisture noise, scale 6, disorder 0. I don't believe anything but scale. I'm not sure. But these are the settings here. We'll run the moisture noise into the top input and the angle of a non-directional uniform warp. And we'll run a black and white spots, scale 2, 0.73, 0.68 into the intensity map. Okay, so here's the non-directional uniform warp. The warp angle is set to 90. You can see it right here. Intensity 6.07. The reason I'm having it set to 90 is that's going to make it kind of look like our grout is dripping down. Okay, so we do that, do a non-directional warp from there. So you go from here, this to this, and you pull this non-directional uniform warp into this one, another non-directional uniform warp, same angle. You can see I have an angle input multiplier. I don't know if I did that on the other one. Yeah, you might want to, this number might need to change too. Oh yeah, here's a couple other ones too. Trail length, trail fade, and trail curve. This is that first warp. All of these settings I believe are important. 6.07, 90, 55, and then trail length, trail fade, and trail curve, 0.58, 0.77, 0.35. Okay, now into another non-directional uniform warp, and this one's intensity 10, 90, 84 for warp angle, trail length 1, trail fade 0.69, trail curve 0.44, and we run on black and white spots into the top of that, and that black and white spots is 4, 1 for disorder, and roughness 0.4, and we run the non-directional warp into the intensity and the warp angle, and we run the black and white spots into the input, and this is what we get. This kind of craziness, right? It's going to be kind of bubbly grout. Okay, run that into a levels because we don't want to have it quite that dark, so we want the height maps to blend together a little bit better. And that levels, we just pull up the dark handle to, and it looks like I moved this gray handle to in the middle. Let's look at the settings for that. Here are the settings if you want to put them in manually: 0, 1, 0.522, and 0.22 and 1. And then now we take this levels. This is our grout, really simple grout. We bring this grout up and we mix it with our blend from our Brick Details 2. And now we do height offset 0.7, which I believe I said, contrast 1, balanced height and opacity 1. And what that gives you is, you'll see, here we'll even pull up the 3D view for this one. See, some of our grout is kind of like going over our bricks, some of our grout is coming under our bricks. Some of it's kind of like spilling over and bubbling over. Okay? And that's the effect we want. And here's a clump of it, that sort of thing. Now, with that, if you want to go and experiment with it, just go to this black and white spots one here and just randomize this seed quite a bit, and you'll get different effects based on the different randomizations. Anytime you have one of these maps, you can randomize the seeds in this. It's not going to break anything. You're going to still have a good result. And you can look at it in the 3D view and go, oh, okay, well, I like where it placed all the little grouty, pushy, outy parts or whatever. Okay, so from this grout, I just wanted to add a little bit more detail to our bricks. So I just ran the height mask here into the height done opacity, and we just run the grout into the background here. And then I just added a moisture noise over the top just to add a little bit more to our bricks. And the moisture noise we have setting here, scale 1, and here are all the other settings down here. I believe they're all the same. Doesn't look like I randomized that at all. I just pulled that down in, and we just blended it very slightly with an overlay and 0.73. Okay? And that is our done height map. You can see kind of the detail that we're getting on that. Okay. So we're going to take this done height map, and then I'm going to plug it into this pin here, and this is going to be kind of spun out to a bunch of other different places too. But that's just to keep us organized and not look sloppy. So into this pin, into a normal Sobel, and the intensity 1.5 only for the normal Sobel, and that'll give us our normal map. And then into our normal output. Okay, and I named the normal output NRM. Just normal Sobel into that. And then we can also take that pin down into our height output. And I just named it height. We're going to want to put that in caps. Height. Okay. So now we have our normal map and our height map done. And that, as you know, if you've made a lot of materials, that is some of the trickiest stuff to do. You can kind of go crazy with the color map, but like these are the hard ones. So now we're going to start doing color, and you can see this grout one I named. Basically, I named it grout just so that I would remember that it had the grout in the height mask. I pulled that out from the mask up to a pin up here that I named grout mask. Okay. I also pulled from our height done here, from that pin that already went to our normal and our normal Sobel and our normal, and I pulled that pin up and made a little plug-in guy here and called it height done. Okay, and that's just to keep it all kind of neat. Otherwise it just turns into a tangled mess. So now let's start with our color map. So let's move up to our color map, and this is going to be the stone color base. So let's do a grunge galvanic large. And here are the settings for that. I don't believe I changed them. And now here's a gradient map. I'm not going to be able to like give you the exact gradient maps. This I just picked over. You go to the gradient editor, and then you go pick gradient, and then you can draw a line over whatever you want to pick for the gradient. So let me pull up a picture of what I used. And that way maybe you could pick across that. But you're going to have to like maybe either take a screenshot or something like that, and then you can do your color picker across that. So give me 1 second. Okay, so here's the picture I used to pick the gradient. I actually like pulled little swatches here. You can see if I turn the background layer off. I pulled little swatches, and I basically picked across these. So if you want, you could pause, take a screenshot or whatever, and pick your gradients. This is the best way to go about that. This is, again, the screenshot I used. You could pick anywhere in here to try to get different colors, or I picked across this to get good brick colors. Okay? So now we're going to go back. So like I said, that's where I got this gradient map. So now we're going to do a flood fill to color. So we need our flood fill. So we'll go all the way back to our flood fill here. This is just right after our first shape mask thing. Bring our flood fill up into a pin. Bring it all the way over here. We go flood fill to color. So we plug the gradient map in there, and then it'll just take those colors from the gradient map, and it'll make some base colors to vary for our bricks here. Just a basic. Okay. Now we're just going to add a little variation here. We'll do uniform color. I'll show you the hex B9BDBC. That's the hex number for color 1. That's a uniform color. Make another uniform color here. And I'll show you the hex for that. 97A0A2. Now we'll blend those together just with a copy. And I'll just do a grunge galvanic large to blend them together. And I don't believe any of those should just be normal settings. And up here, you can see this is the result of that. Now we're going to blend our flood fill to color to here. And then we'll blend this kind of like as a starting grout in our background. And then we'll take our grout mask and we'll run it up in here. And that'll mask it out. So we have our color there and our grout there. Okay? And that's our stone color base done. Now we're going to run that and we're going to do some stone gradients. This just adds variation to the color. So we run that blend over here into this blend. Okay. And we'll do another gradient map here. And we have to pull in our height done. That we made this pin here that runs back to our height map being done. We run that into the gradient map, right? You can kind of see the result. And the gradient map, again, I picked across another multiple colors. That's that same image I picked from. And then we blend this one into that one. And then we use our mask again for our grout so we don't put the red in there. And there you go. And we blend this with copy and 0.22. Very subtle. But you can see the variation in there. See how it gives us some swirly variation, some variation around the edges, stuff like that. So now we'll do another gradient map the same way. Bring that height done all the way up into it. Do another pick of another couple colors or whatever. This one looked like I used a little bit of a more medium colored brick. You can see the thing there, but just pick across that picture. Run that into the blend as the foreground, this into the background, and again for the opacity, our grout mask, which is basically masking off our grout, taking our grout away because it's black for the grout. We go into here, do a copy, and this is 0.36, adding another slight variation. So if you come in here, I'll try to show you the difference. See that, and now that. And it just keeps on adding a little bit of variation along the edges, along the sizes, and everything. This is like a gradient for where the bricks are kind of bumping out. Very subtle effect. So that's our stone gradients. We're going to do some edge wear quick. So I'm going to run that blend into our edge wear here. We're going to start up here at the top with Grunge Map 11. I think those are all standard settings. Gradient map. This one looks like more of a gray. Pick across like a gray, something gray. I could actually give some numbers for some of this stuff, but like this should be pretty self-explanatory. Like here's a hex 5C. Yeah, that's pretty much gray. 5C5C55 is that one. I'll just run through them just in case. And you can pause if you want. But I'm going to go through each one and pause for just a split second. Now you don't have to make this gradient the same way, but if to do that, you'd have to pull the handles in and put the numbers I just showed you. I can't remember where I picked this one from. So we'll take this gradient map, run it into a levels because I want it lighter. Here's the level settings here. I pulled the white handle down, the black handle up. We'll go to these settings here. These are all the numbers. There's more numbers just because it's in color. You'd have to just put these in if you want to have the exact same level settings, but just try to match lightning it here. Bring the levels into a blend. We'll blend the levels over the top of our last blend for our main color here. And then in order to tell it where we want it to blend, we're going to do the where. So I'm going to bring, this is another one, we're going to go from our flood fill all the way down, all the way up, all the way over and around, and we'll do another flood fill gradient. Remember those? So here they are, and we'll do another random one. Here are the settings for that. Really, the only thing you need to do is put the angle variation up. Run that into a levels to tighten that a bit. So I tighten the black and the white one down. So we have the white and the black more distinct. Here are the numbers for that, where I pulled that down. Those are the exact numbers. We pull that levels up into a blend. Okay, put that in the background of the blend, and then we're going to run our height done into a histogram select. Okay. Histogram select. Remember our height done here into a histogram select. And here is the position 0.58, range 0.16, contrast 0. If you look at what that does, it'll select these color ranges and kind of give us like a whiteness around edges. It'll also add a little bit of detail on some of them. It'll have some that are popping out. We're going to blend that with the levels with multiply and opacity 1. Okay, because we want to blend these two together so that we don't have it everywhere, we just have it on some edges. And then we blend that up, use that as our mask in this blend where we blend that levels with our other one. This blend setting is screen and 0.52. So let's look at the difference here. You can kind of see it happening in this brick here. We go from there. See, there's no definition. And now this kind of gives it a little bit of definition around like the edges. Pretty cool. Okay, so now we're going to head over. We just did edgeware. We're going to head over to blending AOs here. And this is where I'm just going to add a tiny, tiny bit of shading into our bricks. Right? You can see kind of like it's not going to be much. It's going to be very, very subtle. And now when I look at this, this is obviously a good teaching point. You can see I don't even have this connected. So for the results we're looking at I haven't even connected this. So we're going to attempt to connect it now and we'll see what it turns out to be. So first, let's start with taking our height done and bringing it into an HBAO, an ambient occlusion HBAO. And let's take that HBAO into a gradient map. You only need to do that because it's black and white and we're blending it with color. And we'll blend that over the top of our color map here at multiply 0.09. So let's go back here to here and you can kind of see the difference. Okay? So just a very subtle effect. We'll do the same thing. We'll do a height done into RTAO ambient occlusion here. See that? Into a gradient map again, so we can blend it over the top of our color again. You can see like it gives us that very faint darkening there. Now I'm going to change the opacity because like I said, I'm not even connected right now. Originally I know I wanted to use this, so we're just going to dump this down a decent amount, honestly. We'll keep it at like that, but it does give that little bit of extra stuff in there. And maybe we'll change this other blend just a tiny bit. Let's make the opacity like 0.06. So this is just a super subtle effect, which is usually what you want with when you're blending the AOs together. So I'm going to take this. So we took these two ambient occlusions, made gradient maps, did multiply blend here. I'm just going over it again because that was kind of sloppy. So the opacity is 0.06. And this one we take into this one. We'll do a multiply, and at 0.06 sounds great. And now I'm going to run this into our detail wear. And there you go. That's just a very, very subtle AO effect. Yeah, I think I like the addition of it. So we're gonna just keep it. Okay, so blending AOs is done. I know that was kind of tricky because I didn't even have it connected, and hopefully our end result looks good. Otherwise, I'm going to be coming back and remaking this video. But all right, so now we're going to go detail wear. So here's our blending AOs and our detail wear. Let's show you the end result. That's going to add all this other crunchiness to each of the bricks, right? So plug this all the way down into the background of a blend of our detail wear. And we'll start with a moisture noise. And there's really no settings, I don't think, to set on the moisture noise. We'll do another gradient map. Again, remember that picture I showed you? This one, it looks like I selected over some of the white, or the lighter color, just to get some variation. I did a quick levels here. I brought the white handle down. Here you can see those settings and the numbers there. Now we'll run that levels over our original out of the blending AOs. Put that one over it, and we'll do a copy and 0.53. Now play with that depending on how you want, like how much you want this to stick out or blend together. So now to get our mask to blend those two things together, we're going to come all the way down here. Here's our height done pin. We'll bring that up and we'll make a normal Sobel. This one at intensity 1. And then we'll just make 2 curvature maps. Run that into a curvature smooth. And we run that into a curvature Sobel. Okay. We'll blend those 2 curvature maps together with copy at 0.29. Sometimes I like to use both curvature maps because you get a good result, a different result with each. You know, this one's more crunchy, this is smoother. If you blend them together, you can kind of get a mixture of both. We'll take the blended curvature map that we got with copy and opacity 0.29 and bring that into edge damages. So to do an edge damage, we need an AO to power that. So we'll pull in this ambient occlusion we had over here from blending AOs, and we'll pull that in. Use the HBAO. Bring that over here, and then bring our curvature into there. And this will kind of give us this really splotchy damage. Here are the settings, levels 1, 0, damage intensity 0.16. Gives us really splotchy damage. Now we take the blend into an edge wear. Okay. And the edge wear we set to 0.36, 0, 1, edge width 0.06, disorder 0. And that's what we get from this. And then we blend the edge damage and the edge wear, and this is the blend we get. We do max lighten. We get this kind of crazy splotchy looking thing. And then we want to get rid of any of the grout from that. So we blend this into this blend here. And you can see how we're masking the grout away. This is a subtract with opacity 1. And I'll show you how we get that map. That is our, you come back to that grout mask, remember. We made one here. We also pulled one from our grout here all the way up to a pin here so that we could use it in a couple different spots. This one comes around and up to here. You can see it here. And that's what we use to get this because we're inverting it. Mostly I'm inverting it just so I can make sure that it's doing what I want. And then I blend this over the top as subtract. Like if I wouldn't have inverted it, I could have just brought it in and multiplied over the top. Okay? But we'll subtract it over the top. And now you can see it did this thing where it kind of surrounds the bricks with white and little splotchiness. And that'll be used for our mask. That will mask our moisture noise over that other blend from the AOs. And now you can see what that looks like here. You see all these good, cool little moistury looking, goofy looking things. And we can kind of take you to the other one, off, where everything's smooth. And now on, where we get that cool, those cool effects. Like that. Okay? Now we're going to run the results of that blend into another blend. Okay, into the background. But in the foreground, we want to do a little bit more edge wear. So we'll bring this curvature smooth here, the smooth one, down into an edge wear. That's the result it'll give us here. We're going to blend this with our grout mask again. Here's our grout mask pin. So we'll get this where it like surrounds the brick. We'll do multiply to get rid of the grout, like I said before. Turn that into a gradient map. That way we can blend it with color. We'll bring that up here to this pin. And we're going to just screen with a really low opacity. What that'll do is kind of give us like these edges around our bricks. So I can kind of show you, right? The opacity right now is 0.14. But if I pull that up, you can really see what we're doing here. You can see how it's like surrounding each of the bricks and giving them a little bit more variation and wear on the corners. So I'm going to pull that back down to what we had it at, 0.14. Okay, I know that one was kind of complicated because there's a lot of different twisties and turnies, but now that you're at this point, hey, we're at the home stretch. You guys are doing a great job. So that was detail wear. So now we'll pull our detail wear into our grout color. Now we're going to finally add a color to our grout. Right now it's just this, and we're going to make it that. So for our grout color, we'll use a uniform color up here, and this one is set at, this is the hex here, ABA997. And we have another one, and here's the hex here, 635D5D. Just take those down. We'll blend those together using a grunge map 13. So make a grunge map 13 with really no settings here. Doesn't look like. Run that into the opacity of the blend. We'll blend those two colors together, and this is the result we'll get. Let's lighten that up a little bit with the levels. Pull our black handle up. And we'll run this levels into the background. And we'll run the result of our detail wear here into the foreground. Okay, and for the opacity, again, we bring in that grout mask. See how it comes from here, from there. So remember, the grout mask comes all the way back from here. That's why I named this grout, even though it's kind of not. It comes from this pin up to this where I split it. Now it's coming all the way up to our grout color. Okay, and that'll give us our opacity. So now you can see it's blended our grout color with the rest of our map. Let's take a look at it. And so here's our color map as we've got going for our bricks. It's getting pretty complicated and pretty good. So we'll take that blend, and now we're going to do a dirt. We're going to go real simple with dirt. With the dirt we need, so you see here dirt. Let's open it up so I can show you, because it might be confusing. There's these dirt ones here, but you need this dirt down here, like the function with the pins coming into it, not just the dirt masks. Okay, so for the dirt we need an ambient occlusion and a curvature to power it. And remember, we made those back here. So we're going to take, remember, our blended curvature that we made in detail wear here. We're going to take that down into the curvature of our dirt, the curvature pin. And for the AO, we're going to go all the way back to our HBAO here that we did in this one. We'll pull that down, and we'll put that in the ambient occlusion of our dirt here. And what that does is it tries to make like a dirt mask, and this is kind of what we get out of it. Okay, so now we'll run that into a blend, and we'll just do a very simple dirt color for this. We'll just make like a brownie color. And here's the color here, 4444037, uniform color. Plugged into the top pin, the background from the grout color into the next pin, and then the dirt to blend them together. And that just adds very subtle. We do copy 0.18. So if you want to see, you can kind of like increase it, and you can see how it gets dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. And like I said before, play with values and see what you like. I wanted a really subtle dirt effect. So now we'll run that blend, that was dirt, into another blend, and I decided I wanted to have a little bit of kind of leakiness down it, very, very subtle. You don't want to go too crazy with it, because then you'll get tiling goofy stuff. But I started with the grunge leaks here. Start up here. I don't think I changed anything. Did a gradient map just to turn it to color. Take that down and then blended it over the top of our output so far. And this one's copy and 0.075. Like, that's super light, and it has to be. But if I increase it, you'll see it kind of goes crazy. Okay. So 0.075, I run that into a levels just to darken it a tiny bit. I thought it was a little bit too bright before I send it into Unreal. And then we go send that into our base color output. And that is our base color. So I'm just going to save that quick. Now, if you got this far, hey, congratulations, you're doing a great job. This is a advanced tutorial, and like I said, hopefully this has given you some really good ideas of how to make materials for yourself in the future. So now we only have one map left to make, and that's roughness. And we're going to do a pretty simple roughness. So we're going to start with our height done here into this pin. Remember, it splits a million times. We'll run that all the way over here into an invert grayscale, because I want to invert it. And then I'm going to blend it with my dirt. So we're going to use subtract. We'll pull the dirt map into here, and we'll subtract that over our invert grayscale, and that's what it'll give us here. Then I'll invert that because because light is less shiny and dark is more shiny. I don't want the grout to be super shiny. And you can play with it. This is my preference. Then I leveled that out quite a bit because that was kind of crazy. And you can see where I pulled the handles for the levels here. If you look at these are the numbers. So blend invert grayscale levels into another blend. This one's set at multiply 0.23. And we're going to blend, I'm going to pull all the way back from here, from our grout mask again. Going to pull this all the way down. And then we're going to do a dirt 2 here. And I'm going to blend, use our grout mask as the background just to kind of get rid of the grout lines. And we're just going to blend this dirt 2, which is set, looks like it's set to normal. And we'll blend with multiply opacity 1. We'll invert that so we have black on white. We'll pull this invert grayscale to the top of our blend over the levels so we can add these little dots in here. And I like to add like some variation to the roughness map that doesn't correspond with the color map. And so that's kind of the point here. We blend those together, multiply 0.23, levels that out a little bit. I pulled the white handle down just to darken it a little bit because it was a little bright. And then run that into our roughness output. Okay, and our roughness output I set to ROUGH. And let's kind of run through. I set the color to COL. That's the color output. I set the normal output to NRM. And the height output I changed to HEIGHT. Fantastic. So there you go. Congratulations. You made it through pretty long material tutorial. Now we're going to head over to Unreal and we're going to do the stuff in there. But first let's export. So if you right click up here, export outputs. I keep them all in sRGB. And you got Windows, bitmap. And you can choose your folder. You can see the identifier here. This will give you what you're going to get. And we're going to just export those outputs. Okay, so now I'm just going to make sure they're in there. And here they are. Here's our color, height, normal, and rough. Okay. Now here we are in Unreal, and you can see our materials already in there because I've already kind of done it. But first we're going to import our textures. And I have a textures folder here, and I already have them imported, but you can right click and go import to current folder. What I'll do just to make sure we don't miss anything is I'll just re-import here quick. Okay, so I'll just select these and re-import them just to make sure that we're all on the same page. It'll probably be just a tiny bit darker because we added that AO stuff, but I'm still pretty happy with the results. So there you go. So there's our brick wall in Unreal. And you can see I'm using parallax occlusion mapping to bump it out a little bit. And you can change the settings to whatever you want and try to make it look however you want. And I like to look at it from different lighting angles because this is a more sharp angle so you can really see the bumps more. And then you also have the angle where you really can't see the bumps. And you want everything to kind of look good depending on whatever angle you're looking at. And you can see how some of them bump out a little bit more and some of them bump out a little bit less. We're using parallax occlusion mapping. So let me show you how we did that. So we imported our textures. I have a materials folder here. And what I use to make it is this mpom.chrn. Now I have a material tutorial. And that'll allow you to make normal bump and bump offset and other ones you can do. And you might not even necessarily want to use POM because it's expensive, but you can get this nice bumpy outy effect here. Let's adjust that a little bit. Have it bump out just a tiny bit less. Okay. I like the bump effect. I like it a little bit more subtle. You can, of course, bump it out as much as you want. So now let's talk about this palm one. I'm not going to show you all the other ones, but we're going to show you the one quick. Now I do have a tutorial. It will be linked in the description. If you want to get a more in-depth, I'm going to go through this fast. So we're going to open up our master material here. I created a material and named it MPOM-CHRN. M for material, POM for parallax occlusion mapping, C for color, H for height, R for roughness, H for normal. They're separated with that to have them all so I know they're not packed together. So let's open that up. Here it is. So this is a texture sampler for color map that I turned into a parameter. I just used a 1 pixel texture, but you can pull in anything as a placeholder. I multiplied that by a vector 4 tint that I set to 1111 so that it's not doing anything to it. I saturated that and ran that into base color. The big thing here is just make sure that the color map is set to parameter. I set specular to 0.35. You can keep that at 0.5. I like to keep it at 0.35. It's just habit. For my roughness map, this is another sampler. I just pulled in a gray texture. I ran the red into a remap value range node. These are a couple values here, 0 and 1 for input low and input high. Those are just default values. Roughness min and roughness max. Those are ones I put in and convert to a parameter. So you hold the 1 key and left click to put those in. And if you right click, you can convert it to a parameter. And just to remind you, to search things out, you right click in here instead of hitting space. So I just set these to 0 and 1 for now because we're just going to make no change. But this just allows us in the material instance in the future to change it. Plug that result into roughness. And then we have a normal map texture sampler here that we plug into a breakout float components. This is just to strengthen the normal map. There's other ways to do this, but this is the one that I'm most familiar with. It's pretty performative and it's really easy. Break out the float components from RGB here, R into a multiply, G into a multiply. Make a parameter, like I said before, name that normal strength, set that to 1, and multiply by 1 in the B. Now we'll append those back together, so we append the red and the green back together in A and B, and we take the blue channel and append it to the end, so now we have our vector, and then we pull that back into our normal, and that'll allow us to adjust the normal map strength if we want it to look more bumpy or whatever. So now this is a texture object up here. So you search that out here, texture object. So you need this texture object here, okay? And then you pull in your texture to this little square down here in the left. And the texture object you convert to a parameter and call that height map, okay? Let's delete that out. So now we look up parallax occlusion mapping and we pop in that node and we take our texture object, plug that into texture 2D. We do height map ratio. We make some parameters here like we were doing before. Name one height map ratio. Put that 0.02 into height ratio. Min steps 8.0 into min steps. And max steps 32 and put that into max steps. Those are the default values, but I want to be able to change those later in our material instance. And this defines this vector 4, that would be the 4 key, and left click, and you get that. You put a 1 in red and 0, 0, 0 in the rest of them. You can see here 1 in red. And that just tells it what channel the height map's going to be in. Since it's not really going to matter, just don't have it in the alpha because we don't have an alpha. But this will just, it defaults to alpha, so otherwise it won't know. So you got to put that in there. Plug that into height map channel. Now run the parallax UVs here into a multiply. And then make a couple more parameters called tile U and tile V. And for this one, always make sure to put 1s in here. I've always messed that up. And then things will tile 0 times and it looks terrible. So plug that into an append, U, and then V, and then append into the multiply. And then the out from the multiply, go into the UVs of each of our texture samples. Okay? That is our mastered material quick. Now I do have one. I'll link in the description that goes through in more detail. But I still wanted to show for people who don't want to look at that. So let's close that down. All right, so now we just need to make a material instance off that MPOM-CHRN. So if you right click on it, you can create material instance. That's what I did here to make this MI for material instance, brick wall B palm. So let's open up our material instance. And there it is in all its glory. And like if you want the grout to be lighter, you can always go back and make it lighter. You can do all sorts of cool stuff. Tick this height ratio box and put 0.013 in there. That's a good height that I found so far. We just did that earlier. Tick these other boxes and then pull in your color maps and stuff. Here's your, pull in the color like this, height like that, normal and roughness. Pull those puppies in, save that away, and then you'll have your texture. You can also change all these other settings here. That's why we added them, to add tiling and all sorts of other fun stuff like that. So that's basically it. You can see this is good for like an exterior wall, for like an industrial or any kind of brick is going to be good. And we're going to, in the future, we're going to use it for quite a few different things. Now, if you want, I'll show you kind of the parallax effect. Right now, we've got it bumping that much. Let's pull up our material here. If we go to like 0.04, look at how crazy it makes it. It really bumps it up. This is a little bit, this is obviously too much, but you can decide like what you think is too much. Some people like things to really kind of crazy bump out. When you do that, you'd have to increase the max steps, because see how it breaks apart there. So like being reasonable, 2 is probably like like a good height, you know, something like that. Or I would what we settled on was 0.013. Just gives it enough bumps so you know that it's sticking out of the wall. So there you go. In the future, we're going to go over some tutorials of how to like cut into this, make them kind of like bricks that like are kind of crunchy on the outside, so you don't have this really hard edge on the side. And the reason I made this is because the other bricks was a simpler one, and that one is more for like facades and stuff. This would be great. This is better for like the exteriors of buildings. So, okay, if you made it that far, hey, congratulations. I know that was a tough one, and I know we went pretty fast, but I really appreciate you being here. Thank you. If you could like and subscribe or something like that to interact with the video, that would be great. And I really hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.